Has anyone heard from Director Bowen? I have not heard from Director Bowen. It is 9 o'clock.
So I knew she told me she was not going to be able to make it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, okay. Well, good morning and welcome to our work session on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And basically, we're going to work on policy like we've been drumming down the road. And I believe Dr. Harmon is pretty much going to run the show today. So without further ado, I think I should turn this over to you, Dr. Harmon.
Good morning, President Hamada, members of the board, Dr. Watts. It's great to be here on a Saturday morning. I will give my formal apologies now that our meeting has started. I was saying that I'm not feeling my best. I think we'll get through. We've got a good agenda, and we'll get through a good chunk of it. But I may not be able to pull a full 3 hours. But I think we will get through quite a few topics. And I said we'll have a full, still productive policy session. And so without that, I'll jump right into where we are and kind of why we have a few visitors this morning. And because we have visitors, I'll let them start in just a second once we kind of go through where we are for our day.
Dr. Harmon, can I ask a point of reference on when we have work sessions like this on Saturday? And forgive me, Sarah's in the background. Can't do anything about her. Do we have to post everything we're going to cover that day? Is that part of what we have to be doing on work sessions, or we just post in general? Just to be clear.
For special meetings, we have to post the topic, and we're not allowed, I believe we're not allowed to deviate from that topic. Right. So if we say we're going to do policy updates, then we can have policy discussion and discussion about policy. We couldn't discuss, we couldn't do a presentation on Core 24. Right. Or I couldn't do it, we have to keep it to the topic that we've said publicly that we will discuss.
But we don't have to put all the materials that we're discussing or anything by law on, like other stuff. Okay, I just need that. Thank you very much for that clarification.
I'm going to jump in. I had the same question because I went last night to look at this agenda because I've been and watched the session all week. And, our policy 1420 says the board should have this 3 days in advance for any meeting. So,
and you typically do. Usually when we do policy work, it's my habit to give it to you at least a week in advance. So you have to review. And I said that this week has been just a particularly long week.
Yeah, I know.
But I was like, usually you do have it. And that's why, for that reason too, you'll see what's up right now. That's why we're having a discussion around what will be coming to. So we're planning a series of updates around the DARTS team and technology. So as we talk about our one-to-one program, kind of applying some lessons we've learned and things that have been highlighted from COVID. So I'll give them some space to talk about that and to prepare for the policy work that will come there after the first of the year. So that's part of this. And then we have two policies around I think more of a philosophical belief. So the language of the policy that needs to be changed is due to law, but they are kind of belief system hot topics. So gender inclusive schools and then student immunizations, and we'll talk about those two. And I have some procedural and policy updates around gifts and memorials. And then two procedures related to policies that you all have updated and changed previously. So to circle back around about that and things that you will see on the board meeting. That's what I hope we'll get through today. And so without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and I'm going to introduce Joelle and Tashawn. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for doing your Saturday. And they are going to share with us a series of technology related, DARTS team related policy updates that are to come. So, thank you.
All right. So President Ahmad, Vice President Daniels, members of the board, Dr. Watts, thank you very much for this opportunity. We wanted to take a little bit of time to set the stage for some future policy work that will be facilitated by the DARTS Organizational Effectiveness Team in partnership with other KSD communities. This is a high level overview to give some familiarity for future conversations. So we're going to share right now our presentation if it isn't already sharing, because I'm not seeing it. There we go. So with that said, I want to set the stage for who we are in the greater context of things, because even though we're talking a lot about technology, one of the most important things that we can come across is what is our perspective whenever we are presenting any of these updates, so that you can understand. That gives a certain level of context. So I want to start with introducing who the DARTS team is. That's our higher level logo that describes DARTS as data assessment, research, technology, and strategy. Student learning is at the center and focus of what we try to accomplish as a team. And with that said, we have our administration and staff and teachers who we support as well. And each one of those pieces is part of a larger puzzle that fits together and is interchangeable. So you can always have two of them and they always fit together well. And that's one of the things that we talk about as a team. Our data services team deals primarily with student information, a lot of data management, making sure that data is interoperable. Our assessment team, state and federal assessment, some accountability support to our chief accountability officer, as well as other things with accountability to schools. Research is analytics, program review, instructional operational research, making sure that we have best available research in order to help inform instructional decisions and also operational decisions. Technology services, which is a combination of support and infrastructure. So the people that you call for help with your laptops, as well as the people who make sure that our networks continue to run despite being in or out of the office. And then strategy, which is a combination of our what's normally known as instructional technology, which is digital learning, as well as digital strategy. And in the vein of digital strategy, joining me is our Assistant Director of Innovation Strategy and Performance, Joelle Bejarano. And she leads the digital strategy project management team. So with that, we're going to dive into a few other things, which leads us to today's discussion. As Dr. Harmon said, there are lessons learned about the width and breadth of technology impact to support our current environment and into the future. So we're going to propose a couple of different things that we feel will help to build capacity for our work. So one of the reasons that, again, we're here is to kind of talk about what our internal strategy is, and to start to create some capacity with that within our team to understand thoughts and needs to support instruction. So our current policies specific to technology and how our work has looked for some time, meaning that as technology has continued to advance, we've run into this challenge of how do we break cycles that occur due to policies specific to technology not aging out at the rate of change. As everyone knows, technology changes quickly over time. And if we aren't able to stay ahead of those changes, then we end up behind, not able to innovate in the ways that we would like to or need to in order to support things like the digital divide, strategic plans, family supports, those types of things. So policies that have technology components often communicates the district's relationship with technology and spills over into the other areas that are not always obvious. So the policies that we're going to put forth, or at least the policies that we are asking just for a little bit of partnership in, are the ones that we felt were immediate need, and then we can talk through others as we go on. Again, this is a stage setting piece. So the specific policies that are aligned to current strategic initiatives are the 2022 electronic resources, also known as the acceptable use policy. Electronic resources as associated policies that will also be introduced in the future. One of them is digital citizenship that we will talk about, which would be a new policy, and that changes the focus from what cannot be done to agreements about what can and should be done. And then 6881, this is a partial technology focus. Some of the limiting factors for community offerings for technology and being able to bridge the gap for some of our families live specifically in that policy. So to talk a little bit about policy 2022, again, the digital resources acceptable use. Historical context is that it was adopted in 1996, last reviewed in 2012. This policy is one of those ones that is compliancy based, low reliance on student agency and community and family considerations. If you look at those dates, again, that goes back to what I was saying about policies associated with technology and technology implementation, not necessarily aging out or being refreshed as technology continues to advance. There's some things in there that you can't point directly to that support student instruction, but it relies on a certain amount of interpretation. So as we kind of dig into that, we just wanted to, again, this whole thing is about introducing a couple of things just so that you have the context later on when we do bring them forward. And then the shift, what we're thinking with this one specifically is the shifting it towards instruction and awareness and away from control and compliance, tools for the wider world. So if we were able to modernize 2020 to a responsible use policy, we're able to shift from, again, this idea of I am in compliance to digital citizenship for students and staff. One of the reasons that this is important is a lot of the state and federal standards for technology skills for students as well as for adults really relies on digital citizenship, because often you are not in an environment where the system can support you and protect you. Things like malware, things like going to the wrong sites and having your own computer infected and then bringing that into your environment, or just simple things in just purely the realm of citizenship in terms of how do I treat someone online? How do I interact with other people online? How do I interact with people in this environment? Again, if you're relying on the system to do all the protecting and checking, then the onus or the responsibility never lives with students and staff, right? And never gets communicated to families. So you miss a couple of different opportunities to raise the total technical level of all the people in your environment, which allows you to do more sophisticated work within technology, communication systems, and skills. And also we want to continue to build upon the work to develop these lifelong skills. So the ISTE state standards, Washington State adopted a subset or adopted the full set of ISTE state standards to create the Washington State Technology Skills Standards. And so one of the key components in there is contributors to the digital world. We teach our students to be able to understand what it means to operate in a digital space. And if our policies reflect and support that, it gives a lot of opportunity for our students to be global contributors. And then also to support some of the practices that allow us to use emerging technologies to ensure equitable access. One of the things that we talk about a lot as a team is the last thing that we did equitable? How can we prove that it was equitable, right? What intent did we use? What was the impact after we did those things? So as we talk about some of the practices, a lot of those practices live and are able to be supported by policy. So we want to take advantage of as much of that as possible, and also to future-proof some of these things. So again, they can keep up with the pace of technology as technology advances. So with that, to describe the historical context and current considerations for policy 6881, I'd like to introduce Joelle Beirano. Again, Joelle is the Assistant Director of Innovation, Strategy, and Performance for the DARTS team within the Community Organizational Effectiveness. She helps to lead our digital strategy work, which often includes policy considerations. So Joelle.
Mr. Christie, before you go on, can I ask
Yes.
a question?
Oh, certainly. I didn't even leave enough space for that. Sorry.
And before I forget, I could certainly listen, but by the time she gets done knowing me, I'd probably forget. Can you actually show me an example when you're talking about looking at with the students in an equitable policy that we've actually done with our technology? I mean, a concrete thing that you could, and I don't want to put you on the spot if you can't think of anything, but I just like to see things in real-time context of something that we've done, so I can understand how we're doing that with an equity lens.
So one of the things that we've done recently is we've redesigned our handbook as well as some of our policies that have to do with things like fines for students, because historically there were a large level of fines associated to students when certain things happen to devices. A lot of those practices in the past didn't necessarily weren't consistent across systems, so we made those consistent. Right now, as a team, we really budget to make sure that we can provide devices equitably across our entire system, which means that we have resources to be able to support programs like iGrad and some of our other programs that allow us to be able to give things to every student that needs it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. iGrad was a perfect example. Thank you.
Any other, I probably should have asked before because I had the last spot reserved for questions, but every once in a while I go real East Coast and start talking super fast, so apologies. Any other questions? All right, so I will give Joelle her space.
Good morning, President Hamada, members of the board, and Dr. Watts. As Tashawn mentioned, my name is Joelle Bejarano, Assistant Director of Innovation, Strategy, and Performance. Where relevant to today, we focus on digital strategy and college career and life readiness initiatives for our students and families. So I'm going to take us through Policy 6881, which is the disposal of surplus equipment and materials. So this policy deals with the physical items in districts like technology, instructional materials, supplies, furniture, and other property that over time becomes obsolete. So we'll be talking today specifically about the technology portion of that, and even more specifically, our older one-to-one devices. So we're incredibly fortunate in this district to have tremendous support from our community through decades of past levy and bond initiatives that in this context have funded technology access for students. And as this technology equipment would age out of use, it would typically be sent to auction, but that changed around 2003 when Bridging the Gap started, which then became STAR around 2009 to 2010. So STAR, which stood for Student Technology Access and Resources, was a program that redistributed devices that were refurbished by students in our internship program to qualified families in need of technology access at home. And while the program served families across the KSD community, there was a particular emphasis on low-income elementary families who hadn't yet been reached by our one-to-one rollout at the time. And as we achieved one-to-one across K through 12, as a system, there was a belief at the time that the need was met. However, we recognize that the importance of expanding supports to address needs pre-K through 16 is critical. And the idea of how we support long-term success for students through technology investments is a really key consideration for us in DARTS, especially in our team of innovation, strategy, and performance, where, as I mentioned, we're heavily involved in the college and career work in our system. So speaking of pre-K to 16, strategic plan number 1 states, prepare all students to be college and career ready by raising the academic and social emotional learning bar and closing the pre-K through 16 gaps to student achievement and college completion. So this goal speaks specifically to pre-K through 16 and closing college access gaps, which is especially critical work for our historically underrepresented communities in post-secondary attainment. So we propose doing that through a policy shift that would provide priority access for students to purchase the technology when they graduate, really to take that with them as they enter their post-secondary choice, whether that be college or career. The cost would be determined on a sliding scale for students who are eligible for free or reduced price meals, which is modeled after other districts in our region, such as Auburn and Edmonds, who have similar opportunities for their students. And so we're super excited about the opportunity to increase this access, but we also recognize that our future work will involve input and feedback from several different stakeholders in this work. And so this is really opening the door for those future conversations about implementation.
Okay, thank you, Joelle. So as we, that is the culmination of what we have, but not necessarily the culmination of what we're working on. We wanted to first surface the things that were most pressing, but we will have future conversations about things across the width and breadth of technology. As you know, technology stretches across multiple disciplines and has its hands in a lot of different spaces. But the rest of the work that the DARTS team does has to do with policy research and review and to determine the impacts through data on certain programs. And so there are things that are in that space And we've also talked a lot about things like data privacy, which I'm sure there might be a question about. So I would at least wanted to acknowledge the fact that this is something that we look at a lot from an operational standpoint, but also from a strategic standpoint. So with that said, I'd like to open it up for questions.
When you're talking about the students taking their technology with them and a sliding scale, could you give me an actual concrete example of somebody whose family is really on the below poverty level? What would they pay for their laptop to take it on? I just want to hear concrete figures.
So we've taken a couple of modeling stabs. The number that I can tell you what we are targeting. I can't necessarily tell you whether or not we'll hit that target, but what we are targeting is about $20.
Okay.
Because what we're thinking is that the base minimum is paying for the license for the operating system and maybe covering some level of support. And the reason I say that we're targeting that is because support cost is a supply and demand thing. As the demand for support becomes more, people are able to charge more for support. So we're trying to take all that into consideration, do some research so that we're on top of the fact that we know that this won't cost, but we're aiming at this $20 range because we think that at that $20 range, it also makes it easy for community organizations to step in to say that we'll purchase this amount for students, or for us to be able to figure out a couple of different ways to get that handled outside of district funds.
And so do I understand this is something an opportunity we're looking at to do, or that we're presently doing? I missed that point.
It's an opportunity that we're looking at to do.
And how do we go forward to, because I think this is a wonderful opportunity. How do we take it from there? How do we take the football across the line and get it done if that's something we decide to do? What are the steps?
Yep. So I appreciate you asking. I think that is one of the reasons why we introduced this policy and those updates, to at least surface the fact that this is something that we're considering. And then we can strategically talk about what are the moves that we need to make some adjustments to policy to allow for that. So we'll work with our community partners to determine what the other impacts are before making this change, because as you know, some of these things are connected. So as soon as we made a change in one place, it might impact others, and we want to make sure that we're not causing any harm to any other program.
And can I make, is that inclusive of, can we afford to do this? I mean, did we actually get money for the refurbished computers when they were out of date or something? I mean, I don't understand the whole process, but I mean, you would be understanding if we were losing a tremendous amount of money doing this, that would be a factor in it, right?
That would be a factor in it. One of the things that we consider is what is the total cost once something has depreciated, right?
Right.
If you have a 5 or 6 year old machine, it's probably only worth $50 if you were to sell it back. And so we think of the value in the terms of being able to provide that to a student. The value is way more than $50. So that's something that we keep into consideration. But the reason, again, that we bring this up to you is that through policy, that's one of the considerations that we would make. And then if we were to bring this forward to you, which it sounds like there is some interest in, then all of that information would be in the supporting documentation and conversation.
So do I hear, Mr. Christie, that you would have a timeline of who was going to do this and when it was being brought forward? Would that fall on your expertise in your department to head up?
Yes, it would.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So
welcome.
In this policy, is it also considered, because I think about just our current learners too, not just the ones going on to college, is it being considered in this policy too that families all across the age groups and could potentially buy a device so they would have it for the summer or things like that? Because I think about some of our families, when we turn those devices back in at the summer, they don't have access. Some families might not have access to a computer any longer.
So Director Bettinger, I appreciate the question. One of the things that we have discussed in terms of strategy is whether or not we absolutely have to have the machines returned during the summer.
Okay.
If you recall, during the past summer, we did not retrieve devices, mainly due to health considerations, as well as we wanted to be able to give the opportunity for students to be able to engage, right, within that time during the summer. This is one of the strategy pieces that we've talked about internally as a team. What does that look like? Obviously, there is cost associated because it has higher percentage of damage potentially, right? That we have to continue to refresh and change, and you'll hear other conversations about that in the future as well. But it is a consideration, and again, it's not necessarily a detriment from my perspective. My team hears me talk about this a lot. We want to do everything that we can to provide opportunities and remove barriers. So if we can afford it, then we will do it, right? If it's in the best interest of our students in the system, but it does require a conversation.
Right. Yeah, because some kids, they might want to just even keep learning during the summer or things like that.
So that's what we always always hope for.
Right. Exactly. Keep up on their skills.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a question. So when you're talking about support K through 16, does that mean that even if when students have devices and they are in college, that KSD would still provide that support to them for those 4 years? Or what is that? What exactly are you referring to when you say that type of support?
So I think support might not have been support in not that context. It's supporting in terms of providing the device, right, which gives them the opportunity. So I think we're providing more of an opportunity than support, because we understand that some of our students wouldn't necessarily be able to afford a laptop and college, right? Or those type of things. So we at least want to give them the opportunity to participate in the current instructional environment wherever they go. So if they choose to go to college, then that's fine. If they choose other spaces, it's worded in a way that allows for whatever a student decides, aligned with our mission and our strategic plan.
So the operating systems that are on those laptops, like for example, Office 365 or other technology software, would they still have access to that if there were licensing issues? So for example, if they had to purchase, let's say yearly, a license to use these software, would that still be a part of them having that laptop for those? I guess I'm wondering what the extra 4 years looks like. As far is it just making sure they have it as they enter the college or career, or is it actually providing some sort of help or system support, or what does that look like?
So it's making sure they have it when they enter, and trying to take care of as much of that on the front end. Meaning that, let's say that the $20 takes care of the operating system and potentially the Office 365 license and something that looks like support, right? To where they can call someone and get some level of support. But that's all part of the program building, right? We haven't gotten that far into the program building, but I'm kind of using this as an ideation session between some of the things that we've been thinking through, just so you're aware of the fact that we are considering those things. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I haven't done my research. I don't know, because I'm wondering too if like Microsoft 365 and things like that, and updates is available to college students. And I'm not sure. I know Apple has some program, but I don't know about Microsoft and things like that.
Yeah, they do. They have student programs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the student programs are usually reduced price. I mean, up to 95 to 97%. Sometimes they can get it for, depending on the agreement that the school has, for $10 for an entire year in some cases.
Yeah, so I have the same questions, but I also hoping, and I'm sure you are, looking at that data privacy part, and just wondering about security, if there is going to be access to some of the tools. I don't know if that's a consideration too.
Yeah, so data privacy is one of our top concerns. It has been for a very long time. One of the things that you and I have actually had, Director Venkatasalam, have had conversations about this. So when we talk about data privacy, it's not just FERPA. There's also contract review, right? Data sharing agreement review, ongoing tracking of software agreements. What do vendors do with information? And so we have systems in place and also processes in place to review all of that. We're members of the Student Data Privacy Alliance Northwest. And that allows us to do things like be involved in a statewide consortium that has national connections with other statewide privacy alliances and a regional and country, right, federal. And so there's 28 states. They help us with contract review in addition to giving us piggyback language for data protection. Additionally, the board approved a Learn platform purchase, which we made last year. Also supports data privacy initiatives due to platform's involvement in the Student Data Privacy Alliance and direct connections to vendors. So we work with data privacy from a operational standpoint, and meaning that we are actively protecting. You've noticed certain things in the email headers that say that this does not come from a KSD email address, which helps with that. And so we're approaching it from a lot of different angles in terms of direct instruction so that people understand exactly what it means to protect. We have the training, safe schools training, excuse me, that also includes aspects of this, because one of the key components in any data privacy is user education. So we want to make sure that our users understand what they're stepping into. So there's a lot in there, but to directly answer your question, yes, we are considering it. Yes, we are making sure that we do everything we can to protect student data and student privacy, and we're working diligently to make sure that everyone understands what we're doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have we by any chance run this by some students to see what they think of the idea if it becomes available?
We haven't gotten to that point yet. We will, though. That's within our plan to have So one of the things that I believe I mentioned earlier, but I'll just restate it, is that in all of the policies that we discussed, specifically the policy 2022, there is a lack of a student agency in any portion of that policy. It really talks about these are the things you're supposed to do. And so through all the things that we've discussed, we do expect a student component. Now, the question that we will have, and as part of our strategy, is how do we do that outreach and to make sure that we have all voices that are heard, so that we aren't steered in one way or another and missing any valuable input.
Yeah,
I
I don't know if you're bringing that up because that was a big component of the WASTA conference. This year is student voice, students having a say in their education. It came up with, keynote speakers. It came up in breakout sessions quite a bit about, listening to student voice. So.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong coach, director of youth activities, youth ministry, all those things that have to do with students. And one thing that I've learned early on was that if you don't listen, then there's a very good chance that they won't listen, and then you end up in this this very delicate space of give and take. So we want to bring them along as early as possible.
Yeah.
Well, I just have a comment that I think this is, if there's a way we can do this fiscally soundly and offer this to our wonderful kids to go on to help them. I know in my emergency assistance work that now that most of the libraries have been closed and everything, that a lot of people on the edge go to the libraries and use their systems and for job research or anything like that. And even if our kids are not going on to college, if they're going to need to get a job and they need to write resumes, and all employers are doing it technically, then they can have a computer right in their home. It would guarantee more success. So I'm extremely glad to see that we're looking at this, and I appreciate everything you brought forward this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the time. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Deshawn and Joelle.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, board, for engaging in that conversation and going through that work. I appreciate you hearing the preview and sharing your thoughts so that the next time you see a policy around these ideas presented to you, you'll have the context for understanding that, and then we can talk about the language of that policy and then the procedures and operational supports that go along with that. Thank you both for giving your Saturday, Joelle and Tashawn, to discuss that and support KSD.
Thank you.
Tashawn and Joelle, you're welcome to stay on if you'd like to listen. Tashawn, I would ask you especially to stay on for this next piece. Although it doesn't live in our world OE proper, there are components of this that speak to our work, so it may be of interest as we transition into our traditional policy update work. So I am going to share my screen at this time and present the next two policies live in the 3000 series. The 3000 series deals with our students in terms of more of an interactive space, not necessarily instruction related, although there's sometimes instructional connections to that. And they typically live in school operations and academic support, led by Chief Mr. Israel Vela and Mr. Randy Heath supports that as executive director. And so these were suggestions that they bring forth at this time. And it says it is sharing on my end, but it does not look like it.
Sure.
Are you seeing a Word document that
Yes.
is a title transfer? Okay, thank you. Sometimes it's difficult to see, and I didn't see the red bar around it. So what I'm showing you is the current policy under Kent School District for transgender students. Because the policy, and as you can see, the policy is very inclusive and supports an anti-bias, anti-bullying, anti-harassment statement and discrimination statement and support for our students transgender as of 2016. And so we just talked about a conversation of how our technology space updates, and we're updating policy and practice to do that as well. School operations and academic support, and along with WASDA, updated in policy 3211, and shifted this from a focus on kind of explicit harassment, intimidation, bullying, discrimination protection, and focus this more on inclusivity. And so what I'm going to show you next is the proposed policy, and it is WASDA model policy. We are not proposing any changes to their language. I apologize, I'm not seeing it. Here you are. And so it's even the title of the policy has changed to Gender Inclusive Schools. And so the language and the beginning remains very similar. So it talks about free from discrimination, and then it expands this to beyond just transgender. So it talks about the full gender identity spectrum and focusing on that space. And this was driven mostly by trying to provide some clarity and support from a legal perspective for school districts and public schools moving forward. Because the federal law does not provide explicit support or guidance for schools to follow. But Washington state law does provide those supports and explanation. And so what it does, it explicitly affords transgender and gender identity support for students across that gender identity spectrum, and protection, and the same protections as all students from a civil rights perspective. So in addition to that, it speaks to gender inclusivity in terms of the reporting. And that's why I asked Mr. Christie to stay on, because this does have component access. So in addition to providing a safe space in the learning environment, it also affords the student the opportunity and the right to be referred to using the gender identity pronouns that they feel comfortable. That is in their reporting. And that's where and in terms of their restroom use, locker room use, all of those pieces. And that's where that presents a slight bit of challenge from a technical perspective because of our data system. So it's not that we cannot comply with policy and will not make an attempt to comply with policy. There's a little bit of a technical aspect of how we are able to change their gender pronouns so that they show up in the Skyward system as a default for staff to be able to express that inclusivity in an appropriate way. So the reasons, like I said, the reasons why this is changing is to support the legal statute. The language is more inclusive and more open, so it's less about the explicit acts of discrimination and more about a more open attitude of acceptance and community. And so I wanted to share that with you. Their school operations and academic support are in full support of the WASDA model language that's here. And although we do not typically go into detail with the board about procedure, I will share the procedure with you at the close of this meeting, so you'll have time to see that and review, and we can take a look at it in a few minutes, but you'll have time for a deep read of that before it comes to the board agenda, because it does talk in detail about the restroom usage, the pronoun usage and name, and how it shows up in the Skyward system, or, well, it refers to a student information system, but ours is Skyward. And I'll pause. Thank you to Sean for staying on. I didn't know if you had any comment about that or wanted to speak to the system supports from that space.
Yeah, just an additional point of just context for how an identity, let's say, moves around our system. Skyward is our central system of record for a lot of our other systems. So the way that it's represented in Skyward, our student information system, shows up in a lot of different places like Teams, Outlook, and such. So in some of the systems that are outside of our control, we're able to change certain things, but other places, the automation makes it to where it's represented by legal name in the other systems, meaning that the legal name would need to be changed in order for it to be able to be changed in Skyward so that it can show up in all of those places. So that's just a little bit of additional information. We make every effort in these other systems to adhere to whatever and to be able to respect this specific policy and the wishes of the students. But in other cases, it's a little bit more challenging just because of the way that the systems interact and some of the system rules.
So if I'm not mistaken, in Skyward, there is an opportunity though to put what the student goes by, right? Is there another field where you can actually put like a nickname or student prefers to be called? So example, if their legal name is not changed, there is an opportunity to have in another field what they prefer to be called, right? Or something like that?
Yes, that won't populate necessarily in the other places. It'll Skyward primarily uses whatever your legal name is. So even though it'll show up there, so that when you're taking roll and things like that, it'll show up in rosters. It won't show up in, let's say, in Outlook in the person's email because your display name or when they first log in doesn't show up in those places. And that's part of what some of the, I wouldn't necessarily say concern, just some of the conversation is. How do you represent in all the places where a student has a digital identity?
Got it. Okay. But any staff members who have access, which most of them do, right, to that system, they would know that the student.
Yes.
Goes, okay.
And how would this address the different age groups? So in other words, where the parents or family members conflict with their children and how to get addressed, how do you go about?
So there are no age requirements or distinctions under the law, under the state law. So the federal law does not exist around this, but there is no age distinction in the state law. And there's not necessarily a direction from WASDA for a younger child. I would expect that with a younger child that would come with some parent support. And that's why I said we're going to talk about the procedure a little bit and show that to you so we can have some conversation. In fact, I'll share that now because the procedure actually that WASDA suggests talks about a meeting with the student. I think making the assumption that the student who would make this request would be an older student, not necessarily a younger student. And as we talk about this moving forward, one of the pieces that I would like to propose for KSD is if we're going to use the meeting model for this to establish the protocols of what a student would like to be called, the pronouns, the name, preference, that if they were a younger child, that the parent would be involved in that. Because obviously there's a certain point where the parent is the authority or decider of those pieces. So it talks about a designated school employee requesting a meeting upon the student's enrollment or upon the point of wanting to change that gender identity. However, if the school offers the meeting and the family or the child declines, they still are provided the same rights under the law. So we still have to use the appropriate gender pronouns, the appropriate names and communication, allowing the same spaces for restroom usage and all of those things, whether they take the meeting or not. So the implementation of this policy and the the implementation of the procedure, operationalizing, the policy into procedure, will actually take some training of staff, conversations with our principals and building leaders, so that they will know how to conduct this appropriately as well. The one thing that the policy does very nicely, I feel, is that it does definitions. So it helps us as learners in a district have the same language as well and a common understanding when we go into these meetings. And then about the how to appropriately ask a student about communication and name preferences and use of pronouns. So that's why I said the procedural pieces of this. I'll give you an opportunity to have a deep read after this meeting. But what I do hear, Director Vangadaslam, is that interest to call out, especially at least in procedure, how to handle this if it maybe is an elementary student compared to a secondary student.
Can you help me to understand, Dr. Harmon, at what age are we talking about where the student can make these decisions and the parents are not involved? I mean, legal age is 18, right?
So President Hamada, the law does not state a distinction of age where a student can make this decision or a parent can or cannot say this. And that's why it becomes somewhat of a sticky technical challenge for us as a district. So we talk about the use of legal name, but if the child prefers to go by a different name, and I would say that it's similar to a nickname. So when a child expresses a nickname to a student, we don't necessarily ask the parent to verify that that nickname, as long as it's school appropriate, we don't necessarily ask the parent to verify that that's an appropriate nickname or that's a nickname that that child goes by. And I would assume that this implies the same intent, is what I'm saying. I think that it's based in a core belief and core value that speaking someone's name acknowledges who they are at the heart of who they are. And that I pointed out at the beginning that the changes here are more about the inclusivity of this and not just the technical protections of harassment and bullying. It takes it a step beyond that. And so the age of this is not called out. That's why I said for us as a procedure, we may want to make a distinction that if it is an elementary student that is requesting a name change related to gender identity, that the parent be involved in that conversation, but possibly as a secondary student, that not be the case. I would say that our middle schoolers and high schoolers are probably more equipped to understand that piece. Definitely our high schoolers, but you're right. Through all of this, if the child is under the age of 18, the parent is the legal owner of their academic record for school, not the student.
But there are a lot of things that students can do without knowledge of the parents from the age of 13, correct? There's a lot of things.
Especially from a medical perspective.
Right.
Yes.
So there are a lot of things that can happen. So I wonder, and I've thinking about some of the experience, so I'm assuming this applies to staff because there have been instances where staff has refused to call the student the name that they have identified as because of belief systems, right? And so I'm wondering, is that I'm thinking, well, this applies to staff as well. This applies to everyone, right? So
right. So this policy is a 3,000 policy, so that means that it is student-centered and student-focused. So we're
Right.
talking about the rights of a student
Right.
to be called by the name of their preference
Right.
related to gender identity and using the pronouns that are appropriate based on that gender identity identification.
Mhm.
And technically, like I said, this is related to alignment with Washington law and the
Mhm.
rights that these students are afforded under this law.
Right.
And so that means that technically, as adults, regardless of belief system, if you are refusing to comply, then technically you are breaking Washington state law.
Right. Mhm. I know, but I know that it happens all the time. So I'm just,
Yes.
and so just, yeah.
And that's why I
But,
said that this
Mhm.
policy update is simple
Yeah.
because it aligns with legal changes, and that technical update has happened thanks to WASDA. It's about changing the belief systems, or at least communicating that regardless of belief system,
Yes.
that this is what the law states, and this is how, as a district, these are our expectations of staff to comply with the law.
Mhm. Can you go down a little bit, because I can see the sentence of students not required. What is that second, by the name and pronoun that, what is that next?
I'm sorry.
Just at the end of this page and go right to the beginning of the next page.
Okay.
So gender change as a prerequisite to being addressed by the name and pronoun that
Corresponds to their gender
corresponds with their gender identity. Okay, got it. I just want to see the rest of that sentence.
I think this is all well and good, and I'm progressive in my ideas. I do recall two very interesting letters that I got from the community. And if it's student focused, I can get that with Washington state laws. I get that. How does this, the rub that I see here could be with parents. But this is a student focused thing, and it could be a staff rub too on beliefs. I get that. We can kind of control that, and educate our staff, but I wonder I wonder if our parents are paying attention to that and how they feel about it. And I don't know.
So the procedure that WASDA has drafted speaks to how the district or the district's role in supporting the student. So from this particular policy and procedures perspective, our onus is in supporting the student and providing them a safe space. And so it does speak to how the staff could navigate this. And so right here, it says, so for families who are supportive, that could be it can be affirming, but for parents who are not supportive and are not aware of this transition that the child is making at school, meaning that that child may not be making that transition at home, and how the school can navigate that. So for example, they said part of the reason of having this meeting or these conversations is speaking with that student and asking them, what pronouns, what name should we use when referring to you with your parents? Now, I think that we could have a whole nother series of work sessions, workshops, and professional developments around how to help parents outside of that family come to a certain level of acceptance and appropriate behavior. But I'd say that to a certain extent, helping someone outside of that child's household move in that direction is going to be a bigger conversation. And that's why I said that this policy, to a certain extent, is simple. But it is mired in belief systems and how others will feel about it. I think that, as always, I will come back to, well, what does the law say? And as an organization who is state supported, and these are protections, not under a federally protected class, but there's definitely Washington state law around this. We are obligated to do this and make a best attempt to change these records where we can and appropriate so that we can facilitate this for staff.
And we're not really equipped or responsible for changing the belief systems of families outside of.
Right.
So that's not our job. I mean, it is a difficult thing, and you will always have people who disagree, but it's not the school's responsibility to, I mean, we can definitely provide information and education, but now we're not providing counseling and that type of thing for families to accept, things that that's not really our purview.
I totally understand that. I just know how these things play out.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I have a question. So this is student facing. Do we have something like this staff facing? Because I know we have had, well, I'll say I've had more experience with transgender staff and staff members who have been, frankly, bullied and harassed, and some have quit because of the cultures. And so is there something like this that is staff facing? Or have we seen, because I couldn't find anything when I was looking, trying to find what are some policies that protect our staff members, there was absolutely nothing. And so statewide, and so I'm wondering, is that something that you've seen lately? I haven't checked in the last year or so, but
I've
I
not
haven't
seen
found
anything
anything.
otherwise. Nope.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And as we should. So with our core business being teaching and learning, we are probably age 3 to age 21 focused, as we
Yeah.
should be. So a lot of the policies and procedures that WASDA writes are not necessarily adult facing or adult centered. But we do have 5,000 series, which is staff, and we can look outside of WASDA or at other organizations to see if there is gender inclusivity policy or procedure regarding staff. Because
and I
there is
haven't
not
found
anything like that.
No, I hadn't found it either. I know there's like anti-discrimination and those things, but it doesn't speak to this. So I was just wondering if there was something that had been found. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question too. I mean, the state law also, you know, the intent is to protect our staff as well. This state law, right? So,
Not this particular state law, right?
No, so no, this state law is
No.
around students.
okay,
But so gender identity and gender inclusivity, there is state law around this. There just
Right.
is not necessarily policy that
Policy,
WASDA has adapted to apply it to staff.
yeah, because we should be protecting staff as well and making sure that the gender inclusivity includes them as well.
And I would piggyback on that. I think our staff should be included too. I know that's another conversation.
Yeah.
I'm sure there if there's not language, obviously, that we've noted in our current policy and or procedure, what we can do is certainly take a look at other existing policies. I'm sure there are others within our 15,000 school districts who have worked on this. And
when I searched for about a year, and it's just nobody's really just thought. I mean, I think it's just an oversight. I don't think it's been really interesting. Yeah.
But I wonder, does it have to be a school building? You know, it's
Right.
adults educating or training, or it could be just a general policy, you know, of staff, employees facing harassment in the workplace.
That exists, but not specific
Right.
to gender identity, though. So that's the thing. It's
Right.
specific
I'm just
to other
saying.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it is a state, I mean, it could be a push, you know, in other areas than WASDA. Doesn't have to be necessarily WASDA determining that.
Vice President Daniels, and thank you for the conversation as well. As I reflecting based on what you just shared, the question I have to ask myself is, I understand the importance of calling it out and you know, saying what we mean and meaning what we say. At the same time, I don't believe that the language that would support anti-discrimination, that it would certainly give us the right responsibility to enact or act if we sense that there was discrimination based on gender identity. What I'm hearing is that we would like to call it out more specifically. Is that accurate?
I think the same protections that are described here as far as transgender and gender identity, all of those things, there should be, and again, this is a state, I know it's a bigger issue than us, but I think it should be called out to protect our staff members as well, because again, I've had staff members who have been harassed and have left and have had families come against them. And I mean, it's been really ugly. And so and in that search to support those staff members is where I found nothing. Like I have found I searched expansively to find what are the protections for those staff members, and there was really nothing. So I was just curious as to whether or not something had been staff facing with regards to the same language. So.
Well, and I'd like to say that, you know, I'm very proud of the church that I belong to. We openly put out that we're a reconciling ministry, that says to a certain amount of people that they're very welcome beyond our doors. I mean, when we were open for business. But I think with the staff facing those and spelling it out specifically and showing them that we hear them, we see them. I think that's important in this particular issue too. So thank you, Vice President Daniels. I totally concur that we should be looking at that and trying to do something with that.
So from a policy update perspective, what I would recommend is that we keep the 3000 series, this policy pure, and keep it student focused, so there's not a confusion. When future people go in to look at this and wonder why there's some adult facing pieces in a student centered series. And then we developed some 5000 series language of a similar kind of model policy work. That's what I'm hearing interest in. Okay.
I like that.
So thank you. We are, so I think we're in a good place. Like I said, I'll go back to the policy really quickly. The policy is short, as always in our work. It's the procedural pieces that are sometimes hard in this. Like I said, this one was very easy. It spoke to just the legal change and the change in the language. Here we are. I think that's the full extent of the policy.
I like it.
And then, like I said, I will make sure that you have the procedure after this meeting, so you can have a deep read of that prior to it showing up at the December regular board meeting. And we will then, at that point, if we need to, if you'd like to individually express feedback, you could do so to me, and then Randy and I will work on that to consolidate that for the December meeting. Okay.
And then Dr. Harmon, educate me here. Would the policy then have a procedure component that you develop because of that too?
So the procedure is what we were just kind of looking at when I was talking about the inclusivity in the restrooms, talking about the language in the transcript, talking about how that's the procedural piece of this. And I recognize that the board does not usually dip into procedure and help kind of co-create that. But given the, like we said, the belief system nature of this, and the likelihood that you all would receive possible communication around this, I wanted you to be aware of what the procedure, of what model procedure looks like, of where the law states on this, and that's why I said I'll make sure you have that to have a deep read in advance as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like for us to do one more before I propose a break, but I just want to make a check. Do we need a break before we move on, or are we okay?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Fine.
Okay. And then thank you, Joelle and Deshawn. That's it. And again, unless you just want to stay on, I never will deny anyone an opportunity to participate in policy update work sessions.
Fun times.
So,
He's out.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Deshawn, thank you. Thank you, Joelle.
Have a great holiday, you guys.
Thank you both.
So our next policy, so this is kind of we're definitely headed up the hill on our incline. So these will be the two toughest conversations we'll have today around policy updates and procedure. The next one is about student immunizations and life-threatening health conditions. And again, yeah, okay, bye-bye, sweetness. All right. So the crux of this is about ensuring that the immunization records and pieces were updated. Washington state law provided some updates around the state board of health, provided some changes to the WAC in three major areas. So they revised rules requiring medically verified immunization records for school and child care entry. They clarified some language around what a conditional status was. So students can be enrolled and attend school conditionally upon receipt of those records. And so they clarified some language there. And they had changes in the requirements of the tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis immunization requirement for 7th through 12th grade. So like I stated previously, the changes here are related to changes in the Washington Code, but they are hot button and could be belief system issues around this. We'll start with the meningitis HPV vaccine information and distribution. And while it is not requiring that students actually have the vaccine, it's acknowledging that parents will be provided information about those diseases and the vaccine availability to parents and where it can spread. They talk about the conditions. This is a conditional piece and exclusions piece. So if students have life-threatening health conditions, there's no change here. That they present that medical and treatment order to the school, so it can be a part of their record. And that then, again, so it's no wonder why school operations and academic support and Mr. Heath's area lives there. That is where our health director lives. And so this would live there, and they would develop a healthcare plan. And then it talks about at what point students would be excluded from school if they are out of compliance with immunizations, or if a parent makes a statement that the child has a life-threatening health condition and they've not provided the medication or treatment plan for the school to support. And so in this piece, again, the piece of this is very, very simple, but what it's saying is that there are limited requirements, and it changes that parents have to verify that their children have been immunized before they enroll.
Dr. Thomas, so the meningococcal and the HPV, that is informational only. So are you saying that they would have to have like an HPV vaccine?
No,
or
so
no?
The policy does not state that they have to have the HPV vaccine.
Okay,
that
that's
they
what I
have
just want
to
to make
have.
sure.
So
just the regular
information from, right. So
Correct.
we have to.
Okay.
So I could see this being part of maybe a supplemental component of our student handbook, or possibly something that when our secondary schools provide their version of their school-based student handbook, that there's a paragraph in there, probably drafted by school operations and academic support, around the meningitis HPV vaccine availability and recommendations from the Washington State Board of Health for children at these ages to be vaccinated. It is not a requirement right now under any law that they have to have these vaccinations. The vaccinations of requirement have not changed. I should have pulled up the WAC. I apologize, to look at the list, and I can do that. You can see.
Thank you. Okay, that makes sense.
So while you're doing that, I see that it's crossed out about students experiencing homelessness, migratory and refugee children. So does that mean we're excluding them from school if their family situation prevents them from getting these immunizations? Or what are we doing to support students getting those immunizations to ensure that they can attend school if they so wish?
Students are not excluded via homelessness. Immunizations won't keep them from being able to be in school.
But that line is crossed out from our policy. So I'm assuming that
legally they can't, right? And unless that's changed.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm wondering why that was crossed out.
Yeah. So here, hold on just a second. I apologize. Let's do this. So here's the RCW around immunization exemptions. And it talks about them in terms of religious belief.
And this is federal or state law?
This is state. This is Washington State.
Okay. So there's federal law that speaks to not
the McKinney-Vento protection
excluding kids, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I can reach out to WASA and ask why they've removed that from their model policy language.
Yeah.
It didn't speak to there being a change to that end. It didn't say anything about
I hadn't seen it either. Yeah.
Exclusions or exemptions. So I don't know if when they do their updates for us, they tend to strike through anything that is not WASDA model language.
Mhm.
And so that it may be that because it's not in the model policy, that was the case. Let's see.
So any homeless student, et cetera, that is described in our policy, by law, we can't keep them out of school because they don't have vaccines.
Correct.
So,
Was it
yeah.
cross-referencing McKinney-Vento? Yeah. Cross-referencing any other WACs?
Yeah.
Do we make an attempt? I mean, I have every compassion for a student that's homeless. Do we make an attempt to try to get them, if it's necessary for their own protection, in my opinion, to get the necessary shots that they may need if they're willing to do that?
So there are limited exemption opportunities under the law for parents under philosophical beliefs around vaccination. But when it speaks to other pieces, I think that's where we, as a district, can provide connections to other agencies that might be able to support them. So even if a student is or family is experiencing homelessness, they still may have access to healthcare. And so there's still an opportunity to do that and maybe connecting them with those systems. Not to take this to another topic, but that is why the community schools model that our Core 24 committee proposed was so wonderful, because that would have been an opportunity, and still possibly an opportunity, to have a limited health clinic on site to help facilitate some of those things. If it offers, even at certain points in time during the year, just immunizations and physicals, will facilitate the school and the family and community and keeping enrollment and all of those pieces in a more convenient and cost-effective way for all parties, probably. So I think that we can help facilitate maybe access or inform about ways that they can do that. Right now, there's not a piece to provide that for them.
Yeah. And that fits in with the suggested Core 24 model, you know.
So for right now, like I said, these are related to changes in the law about us being required to inform families about HPV and meningitis, and about parents having documentation upon initial enrollment of a child. So this speaks to more than like two types of students typically. So we're talking about our transferring students. If it's their first time in KSD, they'd have to have some medical record of their immunizations. And we're talking about new enrollments. So we're talking about like kindergarten roundup. So this will have a huge impact on our kindergarten enrollment, our pre-K enrollment when we roll around. And as a 4-year-old parent, every time Julian does his annual physical, I get the shot records updated as proof, because I know that for daycare and all of that, they need to have it. So yeah. But again, this is sometimes because of belief systems. Some parents are not, don't want their children vaccinated. And so there might be conversation around this as well, but have the law to lean on as in terms of why we require this, and then how we might be able to point families in a particular direction if they need supports with complying with this and enrolling their child.
Yeah, and they have the right to refuse the information also. So I mean, it's
yes,
they don't have to take it. They don't have to.
No.
In particular, I think I could see the HPV being a little controversial because of the nature of how it's transmitted. But yeah.
Right. And we're not requiring that the child be vaccinated. That's not what's required under the law. It's requiring that they be informed.
Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So how does this align with the sex education bill, sexual education?
Yeah, because that could be in there.
So I will not pretend to be able to answer that, but I will make a note of that piece and see if there's if there's mention of the vaccine in terms of helping the student understand what is available in terms of from an education perspective.
Yeah.
Do we anticipate changes with the COVID vaccine? Have you heard anything?
So what's fascinating is this actual change was in a WASDA policy alert that was about the impacts of COVID. Like that was the title of the cover of that particular update. But it did not align this with COVID at all. I would expect, well, it depends. I will say. It's interesting because other kind of common illnesses that have vaccines are not necessarily required. So it's strongly suggested that we get flu shots, but it's not necessarily a requirement that our children, that we show evidence that children receive an annual vaccination for the flu. I don't know, but I could guess that if this becomes either a state or federal expectation or mandate, then the law and then the policy would be changed to reflect that. Or I could see us, if nothing else, probably being encouraged to or required that we inform families about the existence of the vaccine and the benefits of that, similar to the HPV meningitis piece. So, time will tell. We'll have to wait a few months and see. But they
More
did
than
not
that,
take
I think more than that, because by the time I think if I don't know that they'd recommend it, or it'd probably be years. I don't think it'd be the first sets of vaccine, because you go through trials. I mean, it takes a long time to, even though they've been rushing one, it's still going to take a while before I think it's widely
available,
pushed, or even, I can't imagine it being mandated, but it would take a long time for it to be recommended or mandated as an immunization that's required.
So we are moving right along. Our next piece is around, so we are closing out our 3000 series policies. The next is related to our 6000 series, and that's our budget and business operations. And this one deals with gifts and memorials and donations. And so this particular policy shift from a WASDA perspective was designed and changed to clean up language around what types of donations need to come before the board, and what might that look like, what is inappropriate use of that, and what are the conditions under which a school district will select a gift. Sorry, let me start at the beginning. And so the biggest change here that's different from our policy, and it does clear up, as a staff member, it does clear up a lot of the ambiguity of our previous policy, because it didn't really talk about the conditions under which, so our procedure did, but the policy didn't really call that out. So it left a lot of space for conditional donations, especially those that came, and it put staff in a pretty difficult spot, especially when those requests came directly to the school. So as the person who has to sign off on these, on the gifts and donations that come to the board in our regular board meeting, a lot of times I'd say that I was the officer of no, because I would sometimes read the donation and it would require an action of the district, which then to me does not make it a gift, or a donation. It's not a gift if we have to do something in order to get it. So for example, a testing company wants to develop new test items for maybe it's even a giftedness test or some other thing, and they're offering schools, and this is kind of a real example, they would offer schools maybe $1,000, $2,000 for your school budget if you would, allow students to take these, take this test or answer these questions for us. Well, that sounds like a gift and a donation at first blush, but it is not, because the school doesn't receive the $1,000 or $2,000 whether or not the students participate.
Right.
It's a conditional piece, so that's not a gift. It also calls out the difference. It kind of flattens the definition for all too. So whether it is a monetary gift or it is the gift and the value of, so they want to donate services that are valued at a certain dollar amount. And so the minute it crosses that threshold period, they would come before the board and be part of that gift and acceptance procedure and protocol. It also talks about and clarifies if the gift then has recurring costs for the district. And sometimes that happens. So they will offer access access to something or participation in something that's great for this particular group of students, but there's either ongoing maintenance or some other requirement that then obligates the district.
Like someone wanting to donate a piano and then it has to be tuned and et cetera, and
or better, from a child perspective, they want to donate a beautiful kind of play fountain, you know, the kind of public like play fountain pieces. Well, that's great, except there's ongoing water bill, there's liability for like if they're using the fountain outside of the, you know, outside of our school day or at the weekends, and you know, so those kinds of things. And so it just kind of clarifies those pieces across the board in policy, and I do think that's great. What it also says too is that it clarifies that when some of the I call these parent organizations. So when booster clubs or other athletic organizations that are supporting are making these donations for equipment and supplies, to remind them, and it gives policy to refer to for staff, that they need to be balanced in those donations. So it can't always be our football team that's getting these pieces and supports. How are all of our athletic or extracurricular activities being supported in this, so that there's equity in those extracurricular advisements? And then when there are, this is a great one. So this is, I'm thankful that WASDA did this, because this was it was low on my list of ones I wanted to bring to the board, but I'm glad it showed up here in this way, was clarifying the solicited gifts and donations and that procedure and protocol. So for example, donors choose, or any of those other pieces, what then is the space for that? So if a staff person is seeking a donation for their classroom, what does that look like? And so it's calling out that they need to get permission from their teacher so that there's some awareness that this is coming. Or if they're asking for it on behalf of their school, that the principal would do that and inform the superintendent, or would likely come to our office that it's happening there, EDLI. And that it doesn't make a commitment again that there's a return on this, or what happens without the board and district's awareness, that they're not obligating the district to do something and take on those pieces. And that the donation belongs still to the district. So if they're making a request, or for a gift or a donation on behalf of KSD or KSD students, then that gift or donation belongs to KSD. And that's a clarifying piece of this as well. That wasn't always clear sometimes when donors choose and other things would come in. It will be, well, who does that belong to?
Where does it say that, Dr. Herman? That it belongs to the district?
So
it's up higher, I think.
Sorry, okay. I think, no, hold on. I'm sorry, then maybe it's in the procedure of that I was reading.
Yes,
I thought I saw it up higher under like.
That was the point of concern with the donors choose. You know.
Right there. All gifts will become district property and will be accepted without obligation. Yeah.
So, and that was like, so that was a big piece of this before.
Yeah.
Okay, so should it say gift or donations? Because those are mainly donations.
Okay. Yes, typically it's cash to purchase the thing that they're asking for, right? To purchase the thing, whatever the request is. And in rare instances, it's not always a problem, but occasionally that comes up.
Yeah, it is computers, and I know they've ordered, you know, iPads and things like that from Donors Choose.
It might even. I mean, maybe even clarifying all gifts or purchases made from monetary donations, you know, because it's once you make once you take that cash and make and purchase an item, then that item becomes the property. And, you know, I can see all of this. It avoids quid pro quo, where it's like, well, I gave the school this so that, you know, this could happen because I had this expectation of something happening for my student or so this club or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And so, like I said, for me, I was excited to see those kind of updates, because it does clean up some of that debate, and it gives something to lean on, not just kind of well, I think this is the way it should happen, rather than this is what policy states in terms of how it should operate. The piece about, and I think it's related to this, and I just want to address it. So the piece about personal gifts is addressed under our conflict of interest policy for staff. So it does set limits on personal gifts from families or other pieces and all of that. So that is addressed. It's not left out. So there's not a hole there in terms of what is something that belongs to staff versus a donation to school or to a classroom or to district.
So Dr. Harmon, can we look at the unsolicited with regards to booster clubs? And so it says that money or additional supplies were donated by booster clubs or other groups to support specific teams are not to result in unacceptable levels of disparity. However, like booster clubs are specific to the sport, right? So we have choir boosters, we have football boosters, we have softball boosters, we have wrestling boosters. So how could that not, I guess I'm not understanding what the unacceptable levels of disparity are. So if you have a booster club that raises $10,000 versus a booster club that raises two, but they're two different sports or areas, I'm not quite understanding that.
So I think this gets into a related policy around gender equity in some of our extracurricular sports and activities. And I think that's what this is linking to. You're correct. We can't control what a booster club fundraises or not. I think what that says, though, is that as a district, we should monitor the general supports for extracurricular activities in terms of how that happens. Now, it's nothing in the law that says we have to say this, that we're looking for balance in our monetary supports from external people in terms of donation. But I think you're opening the door to something that is worthy of a little bit of discussion right now in terms of equity in extracurricular activities, in terms of funding, and something that's going to come up and be a related policy probably at our next work session around ASB. So there's been some updates to the law around ASB cards and ASB fees for students who are low income, and how districts are going to be required to waive those moving forward. And so it's kind of a similar thing into what that says. It's, of course, that the result of that is unfunded for a district. So it's not like new money is coming in to cover those costs, although it's the right thing to do. I think this is kind of leaning in that same space. So if we start to see that certain schools, so seeing these forms across our district, and you as a board probably see this too, there's a trend and pattern in districts, in our schools in our district who are very good at finding donors or partnering with their community or all of that, who they consistently show up month after month on our donation list. And then there are schools that never show up there. And so it speaks to then how do we or how might we provide that balance? Because you may not be in a community where there are lots of people who are able to donate or provide a gift.
And I could see this like with PTAs also, right? I mean, there are, and I guess, so it makes sense. I just don't know. I'm just trying to figure out how that plays out, right? As far as, so do we tell, oh, you football booster, you guys can't raise any more money because this group doesn't have money. I'm just wondering what that looks like or how that, you know what I mean? How that plays out. So it just kind of caught my attention as to how we would.
Well, and what it says here is it just says, so what we could do is we can strike the language here around by booster clubs. It doesn't have to call out booster clubs. It could just say money or additional supplies and equipment donated by other groups should be monitored for, we don't have to say that it can't be. Because what we're saying, it kind of implies that a school or a club should turn down the donation.
Right, like a PTA, right? That's what I'm saying. So you're telling, basically this is kind of, that's saying that even other groups, so it could be a PTA, well, you can't raise too much money because, do you know what I'm saying? So that's where I'm seeing, and I totally get it. I mean, I totally get that there are buildings that don't have any of that, but I'm just saying, how do we, I don't know how to mitigate that.
Right. It's interesting because I think about, like there's some schools have female dance teams and they might be really great at raising money. But then
and things, right?
Yeah, for competitions. And then, but again, the reason they're raising the money is so that there's equity and access to all the participants and so that they can all participate in this. But I can see it where it's like if the female soccer team isn't getting money, but the male soccer team is getting a lot of money, and then how do you force people to be a booster club for that team because the female soccer team doesn't have a booster club, but the male soccer team does, or vice versa. And it's like, it just
seems a little sticky. It seems a little sticky.
It's
like the word of monitoring. I mean, I think that's really The
Yeah.
crux of it is that we, to the highest degree possible, we ensure that there is
But I'm just
equity.
asking how you could do that. I mean, what would you do besides telling people, well, you can't raise more money or you have to give
Well,
money? That's what I'm saying.
No, I'm saying as a district, as Dr. Harmon just said, there is something coming up in the ASB policies that would address that. And maybe we can cross-reference that particular policy here as well.
But they're two different things. So ASB is different than donations from booster clubs. They're two separate issues.
Yeah, no, but changing the verbiage, as she said, other groups.
Help me to understand when I'm looking at a donation to Kent Meridian High School, which I thought was wonderful, by the Seahawks of thousands of dollars for equipment that they definitely needed and can use. How does that play out to fairness to other schools?
So I think the concern would be that so it's unlikely, but we'd have to figure out how to do this. But I mean, like, if the Seahawks were always donating equipment to a particular school's football team, and they were, and so for example, so you think about it in terms of equity and equality, and they already had new uniforms and high quality equipment that wasn't, run down, and they had all of the things that they needed to run, by most people's interpretation, a quality program. And they were continuing to receive donations, but there were other groups that were not receiving those and that did not have the level of quality of support.
Right.
I think that's what they're trying to prevent, is that level of kind of imbalance. But you're right, you get into how do you do that? And then how do you create a space where the district might be able to redirect or suggest, well, I know that you have this relationship with this particular school. However, they have what they need. Might you consider donating here, where it's a similar program, but the need is different. I think one of the solutions that happened in previous work for me was that we could leverage our Kent Schools Foundation. Sometimes if donations are centralized in that respect, then they can then help facilitate or looking at where in the district the dollars might be able to meet the need that the donor is intending.
If it's not school-specific groups such as
not,
PTAs
so,
or
so
booster
they
clubs.
It's not a PTA or a booster club,
Right,
but if there's someone who
right.
has a generic donation that they want to make, Kent
Right.
Schools Foundation might be the appropriate place to direct that, because then you can have the look at where is the equity lens of what club or what program or what school might need this thing that they're intending to donate.
Yeah.
Did we not have a couple of years ago, Starbucks did a big thing where teachers could designate what they wanted and Starbucks was matching that or something like that, and it went to individual teachers would put out their wish lists and then people would donate that. I mean, how does that play into it too? I mean,
That was a donors choose.
Yeah.
So collaboration.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I mean, it went to specific teachers and what their needs were. And I don't know how. I mean, I don't think we want to, in any possible way, if we have organizations or booster clubs or PTAs. I mean, I understand the inequity in PTAs and stuff because I've seen it right here, especially in different schools. And I actually understand why the Seahawks went into KM. It was a great thing they did. But this kind of puts a brake on it somewhat. And I don't ever want to discourage that. I think we could encourage communication when they start to do these things, is what I say. I don't know. I don't think we want to say, hey, don't come into our schools and help us. We want to say, come into our schools and help us.
No, these conversations are so, they're energizing and they're also frustrating, right? And I think we feel the same thing at the same time. That the energizing portion is that there are ways, and I can tell you our neighboring school district had several problems or challenges with this regarding PTA or PTSAs, when one example is a school that happened to be in a more affluent part of the district actually raffled off, I think, a high dollar amount luxury car for a fundraiser. And they had that access, whereas several other schools in other parts of the school, as we know, and we share that same challenge. Right. But I guess my wondering is what came out of that was that PTSAs, and so part of our culture of bringing all labor partners to the table. So on superintendent to cabinet, Jennifer Ritchie has been an extraordinary partner and has carried the torch on to the next opportunity for us. But there are school districts that have helped to build a culture where PTSAs come together. And so equity and equality can coexist in some cases where some fundraising is actually earmarked for other schools to support or enhance their giving. Where other we have some schools that are having a hard time even having meetings, let alone fundraising. So I mean, we're not alone in that.
So if you listen to this reminds me, there's a podcast called Nice White People, and about how like a lot of these things we're addressing, it's like it was a school that was historically wealthier families didn't want to go to, but it was desirable in their neighborhood. And just so there was an influx of families and they had access to a lot of money. And then, but they started saying, well, we raised all this money for this particular club. Meanwhile, you know, there were other things that weren't being funded at the school. And so it just snowballed. And so when I see this policy, I see all those pieces that address kind of how, if you follow that podcast, how things kind of spiraled and made things inequitable.
So I feel like this particular sentence is not telling groups not to give money to the district, but it's actually telling the district to be cognizant of the disparity that could exist. And so in that sense, I feel like we should just put some verbiage around there in terms of paying attention to the equitable distribution of donations and gifts, and not necessarily, I don't feel like we're telling anyone not to donate to our schools. So that's my take on this particular sentence. It can change to just other groups, and then it can say something to the effect of that the district will, to the highest degree possible, seek to provide equitable access or distribution to donations. So it's Kent Schools Foundation or other, you know, whether it's training. We talked about that during the Donors Choose time when schools were doing this and we didn't have a policy on Donors Choose, how there would be training of other staff to help them to understand how to, you know, get these gifts and donations, where people were really successful at doing that. So I don't know.
So I think it's twofold in that I do think there's some training involved in this to a certain extent for our building leaders. I think they do a good job of this because a lot of these would come directly to the building. So a principal might see or be that, or an assistant principal might be that kind of booster club connection person or contact around, well, who do I need to talk to, you know, make this donation or sign off here? And they might be able to have the conversation with that person. There's likely someone that they see often in their community or in their building, and be able to talk to them about, well, that's great, you want to do this, but here, you know, I really have this group over here that needs it. Might you be interested in? And I do think that if it's a booster club for a particular sport or activity, it's unlikely that they're going to make a donation to another activity. But definitely when we talk about some of these other groups, it's possible. And so it might be better. What I'm hearing is I don't think we're ready to bring this to the board for acceptance and approval, but we might take a look at some other verbiage, look at what other districts may have modified to see how they're speaking to that balance. I think what I'm hearing is that the balance is important, but we also don't want to block people from making the contributions in the areas that they see fit.
And and it's interesting because some booster clubs are for activities that are already highly funded, like a football team, you know, and some are like, oh, we've got, you know, 3 people on the golf team and the booster club, and maybe they're great at making, you know, money and they get a lot of money and, you know, that team is maybe historically underfunded, or choir or theater, you know, that are historically underfunded, you know, nationwide. Right. So it's like, it's also that dichotomy because it's not an either or, because some booster clubs are because that sport's really popular, and some it's because that's, you know, that sport or activity is just historically underfunded.
One of the things that I just had an idea that this might possibly in the procedure, maybe one of the procedural components is that we keep a running list as a district of suggested area of donation.
Mm-hmm.
So, for someone and so maybe that might make it easier for principals or others to say, here are some areas, here are some groups, activities, or pieces that we consider in need. So that allows a principal or someone who comes into contact with someone who's like, hey, go here, or here's the list of programs that need your support. Might be a way to help them, give the gift, but also help us put that in a more equitable place.
So, Dr. Harmon, we did have on the website, I know Faith Sisley was kind of spearheading that when she was doing the website under Chris. We did have a donations website for each individual schools. And I don't know what happened to that, if that went away, but they were able to kind of list out on their own particular site all the donations that are needed. And then they went through a centralized process to get them those needs. So, another idea.
Yeah.
I'm not aware, but I will take that into consideration and investigate that.
One thing that kind of came up at WASTA conference too is even after the pandemic is over, is for some families who can't get to like a PTA meeting to participate in stuff, is potentially still using Zoom or streaming. So, if transportation's an issue, so people can participate still. And that goes for like student clubs and things like that as well. So, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there that might be something that we consider when we're talking about, booster clubs and funding and PTAs and things, that to, look at a different way of doing things so people can be included, different voices can be heard to help direct the money of these PTAs and boosters and things like that.
Okay, so I think, like I said, I don't think we're ready to bring this to the board for action, but we can bring it to the board for update. Like I said, I can look up what some other districts are doing, what language they use, look at some of our previous practices in KSD to see if there might be language we could add and adapt around that idea.
Somebody's aware.
Yeah. Okay, and so I'm going to check in. We've been doing this now for about an hour and 45 minutes, not quite. We're at 10:41 by my KSD laptop clock, 10:42. Do you want to take maybe at least 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes bio break, anything like that? Or are we okay? Or where are we?
How are you? Because I know you had mentioned, you weren't feeling. Do you need a break?
I'm okay. I'm still sitting up and I'm still good. So,
do you know about how much longer we have to do? That might be.
So we're at a space where we've got kind of 3 procedural updates that I want to talk to you about. One of them is related to fines, fees, and charges. So I think we're in a kind of good space to talk about that. The other 2, the other update was around a policy that you approved and became effective about non-discrimination and affirmative action. We have some procedural updates just want to make you aware of. And I think that was related to an exempt session conversation that we'd had. So I just wanted to see that procedure. And then we are done. So that's those 2. That's it. There's not the third. The third was we talked
Personally,
about.
I prefer to power through because I've got to, I was not going to be able to make it till 12 because I've got to leave. So, but it's up to you guys, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I'd like to keep going.
Just finish. Okay.
Keep going.
That's fine.
So just wanted to check in. So I think we are in a good space since we were talking about kind of funding and donations to talk about fines, fees, and charges. So this is one of those procedural updates that is related to kind of life in COVID, something we'd wanted to do before, but life in COVID has allowed us to accelerate that update. And we actually started the practice kind of last school year. So when COVID happened, we realized that there were student fees that have been charged for activities that were not going to take place. And we had the interesting challenge of then how do we reimburse those and refund those for families who needed them? And so we were able to facilitate that. And then that got us thinking about moving forward, what does equity look like in at how do we prepare families for this? Because as we started to do the look, we realized that sometimes the fees that were being charged to students and families were not the same across schools. And the philosophy may have been the same, meaning that there's a different fee for a student or a family who's on free or reduced lunch, students on free or reduced lunch, versus a family who does not have that same need, but they were of different values. So like the fee for that in one school might have been $5 and another might have been $15. And so trying to just align that across the district. So as our students were mobile, they would have the same kind of expectation and anticipation that a fee for a course or a fee for an activity was similar across our buildings. And so here's our previous procedure around this. And it pretty much just spoke to transcript.
Mhm.
Just about, so the only fee from a procedural standpoint related to KSD that was ever talked about was around transcript. And it kind of systematized that process and that cost across the district, but it didn't discuss the other fees. And so what we are proposing, and I'll say we, because although this is a 3000 series, meaning student focused and facing, it was the budget and finance team that worked on the revisions here to provide that balance. And so what they are proposing is, I'm sorry, is a procedure that is a procedure that's more inclusive and more descriptive and makes it clear about the balance, and that it will be forward facing to the board and the public. So for example, it's saying that the fee schedule that schools intend to charge for different things will be approved and reviewed annually. So that they're called out in advance and that they're aware, so that someone can do that look of balance across the district to be able to say, well, okay, talk to us about why you're charging $10 more than every other school for this particular activity. And clarifying the process for getting a fee waiver or reduction for students and families. It talks about fees collected around activities, and if the family is paying for these fees, then that particular piece of property or thing that is purchased becomes the property of the student and the family, not going back to the district. So if the fee is to purchase a particular thing to participate in this activity, that purchase then belongs to the student. And it also clarifies that if there will be no fees for activities and items that are part of a course. So in order for a student to receive the highest grade in the course, it can't be a condition that they purchase these particular extra materials or have this need as an external fee for the family. That should be something that is paid for by the district.
So are you saying class fees would go away?
No, so if it is
Like science class, right? You might need to purchase $20 or Spanish, right? You might need to purchase so I'm wondering.
So if it is part of the instructional materials, then, and it is required to get the grade, then it may go away. So we're investigating some of that. That's what we're trying to clean up. So if there are materials associated with, so it can't be contingent upon, well, my child couldn't get an A because they didn't have X material to do this work or this thing. And so because of that, they then received a B or a C or whatever because they didn't purchase these materials. So they would never have been able to get that higher grade.
So if they couldn't get a workbook or they couldn't get,
couldn't get a workbook, couldn't get those kind of things. So that's what we've got to balance, because that then makes it a condition of income to be able to achieve your academic standards.
Yeah.
It talks about the physical activity, physical education, and athletic equipment. So we cannot charge fees that a child purchase our towels or our pieces if they are able to get them on their own and they are of similar quality, health and safety standards, then they can do that.
Are fees regulated? So for example, let's take Spanish class, for example. Do all of the Spanish classes across the district charge the same $20 for the workbook, or do they kind of get to choose?
They had not been. That's what we're
Right.
getting into.
Yeah.
So this was a very delicate
Right.
and interesting process that
Yeah.
we had to work through, because there was a lot of autonomy
Right.
in what the fees were and what they were being charged. We also had to clarify some pieces that were real logistic problems, like charging for parking, as an example.
Yes.
Because parking is at a premium, but there's actually a little bit of law around that too, and about where the parking fees go. So we've cleared up quite a bit of that, and that's part of this, and not just saying, like I said, not just clearing it up, but then making it forward facing, so that there is that piece of balance across our district, so that families know what to expect, so that there is some consistency when our children move throughout our district. And so it does say that they may be required to purchase, to furnish personal or consumable items, pencils, papers, erasers, those kinds of things. That we can charge security deposits for the return of materials. And then having written protocols and procedures for how that deposit is returned when the student brings back those materials.
Do I hear you saying, Dr. Harmon, that at some point we used to charge for parking in our lots?
We do. It's not at some
students.
point. We do.
Yeah.
I pay every year, $75.
Oh, see, at
We
our
do.
school, it's more at Kent Ridge. It's yeah. Okay.
Do you see how? So this is a real problem.
Yes.
This is a real life challenge,
Mhm.
and so we're getting into what that balance looks like, and really peeling back the layers of the why.
Wow. And help me to understand, because I didn't, this is something new to me. Who do we charge? Staff for parking?
Students.
No,
Student
just
parking.
student parking.
Students.
Just
Student parking.
students.
It's student
Yes.
parking.
Yeah, students.
And so I am theorizing based on previous experience working in a couple of school districts, not just Kent. The reasons for charging for student parking come from all different types. One, parking is at a premium, so there's never enough parking spaces for the number of students sometimes who have the privilege of being able to drive. So you have to have some type of lottery system or something to figure out who gets to park. And then it also is an opportunity for schools to have funding for other student events or other pieces, because then money goes directly back to the school. So there's all kinds of reasons why charging for parking is a common practice, but it wasn't a consistent fee. So getting to the bottom of that and having it be a little more consistent is important.
And it's also, it also rolls into equitable access to activities after school or activities before school, because, if a 0-hour activity, you have to drive and park to get to. And so again, it's equitable access to those activities. If you can't afford to pay the parking, things like that, it's all tied in.
Well, I think it means that students who have a 0-hour, if you didn't have to pay for parking and you had unlimited, you weren't charging, right? Because they only give you a certain amount of parking passes you can buy to fill up the lot. So if they didn't do that, and students who had a 0-hour, they would always have an advantage of getting a parking spot, because they start at 6:30 in the morning versus
right.
So that's I understand that.
Yeah.
I just think it's $75 is up, but that's just me. But anyway, yeah.
Well, it's $100. So,
oh, is it really? It can't rent
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, $50 every half a year.
Oh, okay.
It has,
So
and
moving forward-
historically, yes, it does become a bit of a support revenue stream, and
Sure.
that's the reality, the privilege of that
Yeah.
process. Thank you for sharing that.
And so this is an education piece for me. So now we're proposing that we get away from that process or equalize it.
We're proposing that the fees for lots of different things be equalized. So for example, if students need a consumable workbook for a foreign language or some other course, charging the family for that is not unreasonable. However, some schools, and I'm not saying our schools were doing this, but having one school charge $50 because the parents can afford that, and having another school charge $10 because they know their community can afford it, is what we need to get to the bottom of and balance out. And so it gets back to the real reason of, so why 10 and why 50? If the workbook costs $5, then the fee is $5. Or, so getting, and I'm not saying that our particular schools or any school is doing that particular practice, but I'm giving an example of this is what we're trying to balance.
Okay.
So getting this to, and so that it's a little bit more, and then just clarifying things that we will not charge for as a district. And so that's what this next list says. So we will not charge for field trips that are part of a required basic education program. So if there's a certain experience or thing that must be done for this particular course, then we will not charge any student, whether they can afford to or not, to participate in that particular experience. Textbooks in general that are non-consumable will not be part of a fee. And then the fee waiver process. So what does that fee waiver and reduction structure look like across our district so that it's consistent? So calling that out and talking about that very clearly. So if a student participates in the child nutrition program, so free and reduced price lunch, then regardless of where that child is in our Kent school district, K through 12 or pre-K through 12, they then are waived some of those fees, I'm sorry. And this is related to, like I said, coming forward, you'll see this kind of thought again around this ASB policy and procedure that we're developing with the change in the law of how families who cannot afford to this are not going to be excluded. Children who live in households that can't afford to do certain things will not be excluded from participating in activities. And then we get into fines, which is a little bit different because this is not about access to something on the initial end. It's about a consequence of something that has been lost or destroyed that belongs to the district. And in the past, we've talked about what we can leverage to do that. We do not, what staff proposed, and I know this has not been a piece, a belief system of Kent School District, is withholding grades, transcripts, or diplomas until the student is able to make restitution. I know the possibility of making restitution through voluntary work is not really a possibility either. That's not a thing that can happen. In terms of a student being able to work off their debt in that way, we may have to think about what other opportunities a family may have or how we can structure a more appropriate piece, because there are families who really cannot pay to restore the thing. So I think about sometimes musical instruments can be particularly costly. And so my sister would not be pleased with me saying this. So living in a household with a sibling who lost 4 clarinets, and my parents continued to make the investment in our musical education through public school. I mean, there's a cap on that. I mean, honestly. And so how do we balance that as a district? And so the intent of this is really to provide that balance and consistency across the district so that the practices are consistent. So what a family encounters in one building is consistent with what they would encounter in a different building if they were to move, or if they have a child at a middle school doing this. Oh, well, wait, why does the replacement cost for this cost way more to middle school than it does at the high school, or something like that? So that's the intent of this. I think there's some additional updates that need to happen because it's similar to our debt piece after all. So you as a board know that on occasionally I will bring to you that we are going to write off a certain amount of district debt because we do have damages or other things that are owed to us, possibly from facility rental or other things. And then at some point you have no leverage to recoup those funds. And I think sometimes that is the cost of doing business, but we want to balance that, especially when we're talking about on the parent and student side. But also, we don't want to over communicate that it's okay, you don't have to pay us back, because we don't want our students to be careless. We want everyone to be good stewards of our resources. So that's the goal of this. So you will see more in this. And like I said, I will share all 3 procedures that we've talked about today so you can have deeper reads of what that looks like. But that's definitely the problem we are trying to solve, is providing that balance of what was just highlighted amongst a collection of 6 adults. So imagine what that looks and feels like across our entire community.
Right.
Just a quick question. So with our 0 hour, our kids have to provide their own transportation. We don't provide any type of transportation if kids want to do that and just absolutely can't get there, right?
We do not at
That's
this
my
time.
understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, and my kids have been doing 0-hour choir since my daughter was in 4th grade.
Yeah.
So it's and again it's carpool, you carpool and things like that. But there are some families that don't live in a easy place to carpool, and again goes into boundary. Sometimes a student lives near Meeker but goes to Northwood,
Right.
and and there might be the only child in that wanting to be in that 0-hour choir, so there is no carpool opportunity. And so yeah.
So this raises a different issue, but related. And I think this goes back to, I think this is going to be my theme for our 2020-2021 school year, about like our moral commitments and belief systems and how we live those as a district. Because that seems to be of late, the past 2 weeks at least, that's kind of constantly like the thing of like, yeah, we've got to decide kind of what we're committed to and how we express that.
Right.
And there are, just today, we've highlighted several opportunities today of where we express or how we might express those as a district.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there was a teacher at Kentridge for a while that would do a choir at lunchtime if the students wanted to, like 2 or 3 days a week, because they, 0-hour was difficult to get to, So again, it's equity and access. If we're not, and that's also when we talk about Core 24 and 7-hour, days, like back in the day when I went to high school in the dark ages, something that would be 0-hour choir now was it was an elective.
And 0 choir is but it's still a choice, right? It's still
it's audition.
It is audition. So that's another piece, right? It's not something. So it's great that there are teachers who would do that, but it is an auditioned choice choir. You have to.
But again, I don't want, if a student doesn't even audition because they know they can't get there, that's a barrier.
Yeah.
So I think that's food for me and the team to think about as we draft language around the ASB activities. Not completely around ASB. This is not ASB specific, the conversation we're having right now. But as we think about what equity might look like as we do that and embed that in a policy, I think we're leaning toward ideas of access for activities across this. That seems to be our theme today, related to our policy and procedural work. What does equity of access look like for our students and families?
And something else to think about. So this was my experience with when we first moved here. My son was in highly capable, and we live in the Covington school district, right? We lived in that boundary, and the highly capable school that transportation was provided to is Grass Lake. Well, Grass Lake was full, and so the option was he either could not go because the class was full. He could not be involved in highly capable. Or Meridian Elementary School, which is like not even a half mile down the street from me, he could get there, but I would have to provide transportation. So the bus provided transportation to Grass Lake for those kids who, were in the boundary, but it would not provide transportation. So because that program was full, it was up to me. If I hadn't been able to provide transportation to him to go to Meridian, then he would not have been able to participate in the program. And I think that's something that, again, when we talk about equity, the fact that if a program like that is full, which we want as many of our students as possible, right, who qualify to be able to participate, well, we also have to consider, even if the program at that school is full, if that's the only program we're providing transportation to, I think we need to try and figure out how we can provide that transportation again to other, and I know it's a lot, but I'm just saying that is an equity issue, because I was blessed that I could actually, literally what he did was walk to the end of the corner, which across the street from at the end of the corner was Meridian, and he'd just catch the bus down there and go to Meridian. But it's just a blessing that we could do that, or I could take him. But I'm thinking about when we have, especially kids who are, again, income challenged and, may not be able to, if they qualify for these programs and they have if the program's full and they have no transportation, I think thinking about something like that too, right? Because that's an equity access issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I see two intersections here for board. I see several for staff in my head, but I see two for board in this. I think that there's a WASA model policy. I believe we have the policy as well around student activities. So it might be something that because I think, although we're talking about specific aspects of this and these different policies and procedures we've looked at today, I think it might be time to look at our student activities policy, where the board might be able to express some of their beliefs and expectations in that around access. And then that would then lead to the other opportunity for the board. And I can't believe I'm saying I can't believe we're here in November already saying this, but thinking about budget for school year 21-22. So, so as we think about this, how will this then come up again as we start our budget planning for next school year in the spring? And so I think that those are the two pieces that I may remind you of November 21st when we're in 2021, and these topics come up again of kind of, so here's why we're back on this policy and this idea, and then here's where we are with budget.
Yeah. And it could even tie back into the gifts and the boat boosters and things like that. It's like the booster clubs might be encouraged to help get transportation for students to participate,
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
the one highlight has been the community partnerships. Tishan brought it up early when discussing the computer access issue. I think we need to really work with our community partners in all of this, whether it's foundations or our nonprofits, because we can't do this on our own. We need that support. So thank you. I think you've done a really good job, Dr. Harmon, of just describing the complexities of all of this, but also listening to our comments and providing solutions, and that's really where we need to be.
Well,
So,
we're in this together, and we have a common goal, and we're all moving toward a common outcome. So I think this one is last but not least. This one is just to share as an update without a lot of detail. We updated our affirmative action policy, and this is the updated procedure. A couple of things needed to be updated. Most simply and obviously is we have listed, and this is for more of kind of the EEO complaint piece. We have compliance officers related specifically to those pieces of Mr. Israel Vela and Mr. Randy Heath, and there were previous names listed in the procedure. So if someone did encounter this, they did not know the appropriate person to contact, didn't have the appropriate contact information, and then it clarified that the complaint could be written or verbal. Previously, it was listed as just a written complaint. I mean, just it had to be written, and it can be written or verbal. So it clarifies all of those pieces. And then it also clarifies possible outcomes. So it makes it clear that even though there is a complaint and there may be action and a grievance filed, and there may be what are the recovery remedies that are possible to this, that aren't guaranteed, but just listing what they could be. And so back pay, hiring, promotion, reinstatement of position, any punitive damages. But the goal would be to make that particular employee whole again if there were evidence of retaliation or evidence of the discrimination or violation of the Affirmative Action Act. And then it lays out the process. There were no changes to the process in that respect. Other than, again, I believe at the bottom, we then list out again all of the full contact information for those two individuals, I believe, are listed at the bottom again. So district contact, if this accelerates beyond district control, so if they continue this process outside of the district, then it moves from Mr. Vela to our CHRO, and so it handles through an HR process because it's an employee. And then who the state contact is to continue that complaint process. And then the national level, if it becomes a federal piece. So the vast majority, name updates, and then clarification on whether or not a complaint had to be written or could be verbal.
So the only thing, and this is, I was thinking the same thing when we went through the other policies, and it said compliance officer, like who people know who that is. Is there any way to, wherever it does say compliance officer, we indicate that in our policies? Because I know we had a previous policy where it talked about a compliance officer.
So
for complaints?
We can do that in policy. I will leave it up to you all to determine if that's the best interest, and I'll tell you why. I'll leave it up to you to consider that. So if you list a person's name in policy, that means that whenever you have staff overturn, the board has to go through and readopt the policy.
Yeah.
That's why we talk about the position or the role, and then we try to, as staff, remain consistent and current in the procedural update, calling out the specific person and contact information. And so if you'd like to in the board, there's nothing saying you can't list the person in the policy.
Not
it just means
policy.
that whenever there's, in the
Not
procedure,
policy.
absolutely. The procedure, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So to that end, because sometimes, you know, if there is turnover and and workflow makes it difficult to update the procedure quickly, can we name a name and a job title? Because then, Mr. Israel Vela or chief of this, or, Dr. Wade Behringer or chief of HR, you know what I mean? So that if there's not enough, if there's other things going on and there's not a chance to update it quickly, just listing the position to, this person, or, in case there's, I don't know, it just that way, if someone was looking at it and like, I'm pretty sure probably Mariah's name was on there. And so there's been a lag, right? But if it said Mariah Martin or Chief Human Resources Officer, then someone would know, oh, okay, well, even though she's no longer here, I just have to look for the,
That's a good idea.
Yeah. In the past, it's always been just compliance officer, and we never knew. They didn't even say human resources in several areas.
Right. So if you name the position too, then that gives people a way, at least a part of the map to get to who they need to talk to.
At least be allowed to make a first step.
Yeah.
Say, well, and then reach up to make the first step. So that's the last update. That's our procedural update. So we've made it through. And like I said, I apologize on the delay. Usually, like I said, I try to make sure you have at least a week to review and have that in advance. And typically, I would never waste an opportunity for us to have a packed agenda because it allows us to be as productive as possible. But I thank you for that grace, because it has been just a long series of weeks. But I think we had a very productive session in terms of allowing my team to be able to know what to bring forward in your interest as we start to develop those technology related policies. I think we have some movement on our two student facing policies around immunizations and the update of the law, as well as our gender inclusivity pieces. And thank you for your insights on our procedural updates. And I will make sure that you have all three of those to have a deeper read as well. And just know that the two student-facing ones will move forward on policy. I believe is it December 8th? Can't be in the meeting. 9th. Regular board meeting. And the accompanying procedure around the gender inclusivity will be there. But like I said, if you have feedback or communication, please send that to me individually. And then the gifts and memorials policy itself, I think, will work with staff a little bit more. And based on some feedback I heard today, and you might see a second iteration of this, not necessarily for action, just as an update.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Harmon, for being here when you didn't feel good, and also on a Saturday, and for all the work and everything. It is great. I was worried that I was supposed to be very knowledgeable today on what we're going to do. And I panicked when I saw this, when I didn't see stuff on there. I thought, oh man, what if I dropped the ball on here? I wonder, again, how much, so do I hear we're going to have a couple of these for first reading of the board, or is this the first reading? And then in December, we're going to have some to go through?
So our next technically policy work session period will be I think in January. Because of the cadence and what I did today, they will just be first reading and discussion of what we've done. The adoption action will actually take place at our regular meeting in January.
Just wanted clarification. Thank you very much on that.
Don't worry, I got that learning from Curtis at our first meeting this fall, and I was like, that'll never happen again. So
Okay. Terrific, terrific.
Great. Yeah, thank you for all this.
And I don't think we have anything else today,
No.
so
Unless there are any further questions or comments.
thank
And
you all for
obviously-
being here. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Harmon. Thank you, Casey, as well, for technical support.
Yes.
baby.
Yes.
Obviously, thank you to our
Yeah.
board for your work.
Do.
We're making progress, clearly, and thank you
Yes,
for your
for
diligence in managing our process to procedure.
Can you get down,
Yeah.
please?
Thank you for all your
Keep
thoughtful
it
work,
that way.
Dr. Harmon, and
Yes.
everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Saturday.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Care.
Bye.
Be safe. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Are you adjourning, Leslie?
Pardon me? Yes, the meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
11:14 I have. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. All right.
Thank you.